quick introduction. Chris Moore is the Vice President with the Mobile Business Unit of Micron Technologies. Micron's, again, one of our partners. For those of you who don't know a lot about Micron, one of the largest producer of memory and storage. Paul Torres is Senior Director of Product Management at Qualcomm, where he's been for the past, sort of 15 years or so, focused obviously on the Snapdragon product and mobile. How you guys doing? Okay?
Doing well. Good to have you today. Thanks.
So anything you just hear from Peter on 5G and the networks that sort of, I mean, you guys live and breathe mobile every day, but anything that you heard that you thought was sort of, you first time hearing it, or something that you think the group really should have been sort of excited by?
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in first. To me, the most exciting things about 5G, well, in the COVID area, I'll say, working from home right now, I'm having internet connectivity issues. I live in an area, a semi-rural area, where having problems with the 4G network as well as with the landline, and 5G will solve that problem. So I'm excited about that, just from a pure efficiency point of view, as well as when whatever streaming video that my kids are watching turns off all the time. I'm looking forward to the improved home network there for that. The other thing that I think that 5G will really bring, that is truly going to revolutionize the way we live and the way we work, is the Internet of Things. I believe 5G is an enabling technology for something we've been talking about for a long time, where we're gonna see more efficient water use with drones flying over agriculture areas. We're gonna see, when Internet of Things were first started talking about it, it was your RFID on your eggs in your refrigerator to tell you that you needed to go buy new ones. It's going to be so much more than that. Autonomous driving, all of these things. And again, the COVID era is going to change the way we think about cars and transportation and all of that. Clearly, and 5G coming at the same time is, to me, a revolutionary technology it's really going to change the way we look at things 10 years from now, 5 years from now.
So Paul, what is, IoT is one of those things where we've been hearing about it for a decade. Obviously, Peter mentioned it. Christopher's now mentioning it. Has IoT been a success? I mean, a lot of us look at it as we've been talking about it. Maybe it's a failure. Talk a little about IoT and again, the role of even the processor. I mean, all these sensors sitting at the edge of a network, sort of how does Qualcomm think about IoT, and how do you think about sort of what IoT has done in the past decade?
Yeah, it's a good question. IoT has been around for, like you said, a very long time. And you have devices that, that started off as like stationary devices, but then you added more connectivity to these devices, whether it's through Wi-Fi or Bluetooth and things like this that would connect to another device. I think with the introduction of 5G, you have a lot more bandwidth, and you have also a lot lower latency. So the low latency and the high bandwidth, you're going to start to see things connecting to other devices, and a lot more so than today. So if you think about it, like Chris was mentioning, like automotive and like how your car is going to drive and things like this. So devices are going to start talking to devices with 5G, right? With millimeter wave, especially in dense populations, where you're going to see things like cars talking to stop signs, right? And our cars talking to other devices. So it's going to be machine to machine. So we'll see a lot more of that. I also think that with cloud connectivity with 5G, you have AI on devices, and you also have AI in the cloud, and those will be shared between those. So you're going to have more of this distributed computing and ubiquitous computing around you. And you're going to also see things. You also mentioned something about context, right? So contextual data. So all these devices that are around you are providing some level of context. So whether you know it or not, that there's this computing that's going to happen around you to make your life simpler and easier, like whether it's like the automotive or your thermostat in your home or connecting devices, one thing to another. I think it'll just be more of this ambient, symbiotic relationship between different devices. So I think it will continue to evolve.
Right. So intentionally, we left the word phone off of the title of this session, right? Because I think now when we talk about mobile, it's much broader. So to your point, we're talking about all these different devices, the car as mobile, but obviously still people think of the handset, that we all carry in our pockets. We all carry a handset. And, handsets have gotten incrementally better. I actually pulled my first iPhone out of the drawer the other day just to compare it to what it was today. The screen's bigger, it's a little thinner. Obviously the OS has gotten better, the camera, the optics, but I would argue it's almost like felt iterative, right? It's still pretty much the same thing. Is that sort of not a good way to think about the innovation that's happened in mobile? Talk about like really what has happened, because from a handset perspective, we're seeing that incremental innovation, but have we seen these huge things maybe inside a phone that none of us are sort of recognizing?
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question, right? I think that you're seeing a couple things, right? I mean, certainly I think that the pace is really fast. If you think about it, it's like you mentioned, it's like the first iPhone that you had, right, was a 2G platform, right? And then you moved to a 3G platform. Really, that's when you started to see a smartphone, with that transition from 2G to 3G, right? I mean, if we call the flip phones, like in your title of this discussion to this panel was, flip, right? And that was the 2G era. Then you moved to the 3G era, and then you saw the smartphone. And then, you started to see some applications on that smartphone that made that utility of that smartphone better. And then you went from 3G to 4G, and then you saw a lot more innovation, right? Especially in terms of not only on the device, but what you saw is also applications using the device. So you had a lot better connectivity, right, when you're in 4G, and you had those streaming applications or different applications that are connecting to the cloud. So now that transition of 4G to 5G, you're going to see a lot more of those devices talking to one another, including the smartphone, right? So the smartphone, I think, is like, one of the most personal items that you have, right? And so that is, that will connect to pretty much everything that you're going to be using. And I think the cloud component is a very important one, right? So that fast, connectivity, or the fast bandwidth, or the high bandwidth and the low latency that we talked about before. And so that's just like, from connecting the device, but also on the mobile device, you're seeing a lot of different innovation as well. Now, you talked about like, the camera is like iterative, or the bigger displays, but all that technology has been evolving over the past decade, right? And even today, your camera is not that same, point and shoot camera that you once had. It's using a lot of AI technology on the device. And it's also, other areas like, speech to text, right? That's also using AI capabilities on the device, or real-time language translation, right? Also using AI on the device. So even though the form factors may seem similar, right, from generation to generation, I think the technology underneath that form factor is evolving, and including like this display technology, the higher resolutions and everything else like that. And and that's why close with Micron, right, is important, right? Because even we try to stay in lockstep of what's happening from a use case perspective, because all these use cases, are all crammed on this one little device. And so working with partnership like with Micron from a memory bandwidth is important.
Right. And Christopher, talk about sort of when you look at even the demands on our phones. I mean, I look back and I think about my first laptop had 4 megabytes of RAM. Right. And now it's funny because I look and now it has 4 gigabytes of memory,
Right.
of RAM. And sometimes I almost get confused. It's like deja vu, but our phones are the same way. And when we've seen this exponential need for more, memory and storage on our devices, talk about how Micron has seen that acceleration.
Sure. In fact, I'd love to give a personal story too about kind of a revolutionary technology that seems incremental. But you're right. In today's phones, there's 12 gigabyte phones out there that you can buy today, which is just amazing to me. That's more than I have in my laptop, and it kind of makes sense because I'm using my phone a lot more than I use my laptop, right? If you ever look at your screen time statistics, they're sometimes scare me, to be honest with you. But a story, personal to me and also associated with Micron and storage is the amount of storage you have in your phone. 20 years ago, I actually went to a small little startup, and at the time, 20 years ago, all memory is built on a wafer, right? It's a solid state memory, the NAND memory itself. That wafer is flat. And I think most people know you build a transistor, and you can think of all those transistors kind of like a 1-story house on a piece of land. Well, I went to this startup, and what we were building was the ability to build skyscrapers on that land. So instead of just having one transistor, we actually built them in 3D, where we would layer polysilicon and polish and do a bunch of fancy things so we could build these transistors going up. And what that does for you is it allows you to get much higher capacity in a much smaller space, which is why today, 20 years later, a lot of that fundamental IP we put together, that's why you can buy a 256 gigabyte smartphone, how you can fit all that in there, because it's actually, while it sounds easy to go from 64 gigabyte to 128, it was actually a revolutionary way that we're making the memory. And pretty much every storage device, semiconductor storage device you buy today is based on 3D memory. And it's kind of seamless innovation, right? To the end user, it looks incremental, to your point, but there's decades of work that go into actually making that happen. I do think that the amount of storage and memory is going to continue to grow. The amount of what I would say is 5G is going to enable a much more immersive usage model with your phones. While today we're talking on Zoom with 4G networks and with Wi-Fi, we're looking at it from a 2D dimension. In the near future, as you're watching a sporting event through 5G, you're going to very easily be able to pick which angle you want to view that event from. When we're sitting here in Zoom, high probability this will be more like a holographic experience as opposed to a two-dimensional experience. And you'll be able to, you think about someone's face just talking to them and how much more immersive that is. But imagine if you're having a Zoom meeting and able to show something, turning it around, and people can actually see what it looks like. That's all going to require more storage, more memory, and more bandwidth, which 5G will enable, and which your handsets and whatever devices you have, these mobile devices, will allow you to work.
Right. Great. So, one of the things we talked about when we were prepping was really the cooperation between companies and vendors to make these things possible, right? With, it's not off the shelf components that anyone could just go buy and slap together, right? That it really is cooperation, understanding the use cases, the applications, and how to optimize and build, sort of the best hardware. Talk a little about how your two companies, Micron and Qualcomm, sort of interface, and sort of how do you sort of work together to provide the handset manufacturer or the device manufacturer with the best solution?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've been working with Chris for quite some time now, and Micron in general. And one of the things that we are ramping up with 5G is this LPDDR5, right? And that provides much more robust memory capability and higher bandwidth, which is also needed with these higher end devices, especially moving into the 5G platform. So, and you think about this, a lot more speed, and just from opening different applications and supporting these different applications and having that more connectivity all puts strain on resources within the device itself. So that's why we need the faster memory on the device. That's just on the DRAM side. On the storage side, what you're seeing is also more content on the devices, right? So that's why you're seeing the increase in up to terabytes now, right, on premium phones, which is, think about that, right, which is kind of ridiculous, but you'll start to see these in the premium tiered handsets. But and that capacity will be used. The other thing about this is, like, we talked about 5G and that, how fast it's going to be from a bandwidth perspective and latency perspective. So you don't want the bottleneck to be on the device itself, right? So that's why the DRAM is going to be important. That's why also storage will be important, that faster write speeds. Say, for example, you want to download a movie before COVID, if you were to go on a trip and like hop on a plane, you want to download a movie for a trip or something like that, you want to fast write storage for that. And that's why you're going to see the faster speeds even on the storage side.
Right.
Yeah, I would add,
Go ahead,
Paul and I work together quite a bit, and our teams work together quite a bit. It's a strong partnership. We share similar customers, so at a very tactical level, we have our engineers in the labs together, qualifying our parts together, so that when we give them to our customers, they work out the chute. And as we get deeper and work more and more with our engineers, we're starting to look at our real shared customers, which are the consumers, right? And there you see, as Paul was pointing out, the faster speeds that LPDDR5 brings. It will bring the new usages, but there's another thing that it does. It improves battery life. So by running faster, we're actually allowing us to get the data to Paul's processor quicker. He can compute it faster and then go back into a sleep mode faster. So we actually see about a 10 to 15% improvement in battery life for the end user just because we have a faster DRAM. thinking at the total system level and thinking at the end user and the consumer level is really how the cooperation between Qualcomm and Micron work. And what are the next specs coming? I think Paul and I both share the idea that our job is to create the hardware for whatever that next software or whatever that next network innovation that's coming out enables, right? And trying to stay ahead of that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting thing what you said about battery life. I just want to, expand on that. From a consumer perspective, you want your phone to last all day, but at the same time, we're adding a lot more capability within the device. We talked a little bit about AI, but also the screen size are becoming better, the higher resolution of those displays, and then more content on being on that device. And that's, all of those resources put a strain on the overall battery. So we're hyper focused on device level performance, especially from a days of use perspective, right? Having not putting so much constraints on the battery itself, right? And by being much more efficient.
Right. So I want to go to a couple quick questions before we have to wrap. The first is around this idea, we've talked a lot about 5G. 5G will enable more edge computing, both moving sort of processing, from the endpoint to the edge, and also from the cloud. Will this drive down the pricing of handsets because you won't need as much power actually in the handset and you'll push some of it to the edge? Is that sort of a reality, or?
Wow, that's a tough one. My personal opinion is that we as technologists between Qualcomm and Micron, as well as the other vendors out there, we're always going to come out with new and exciting things. As we spoke about, why do we call this a phone? It's really not a phone. It's your map. It's your, people call it digital assistants. It's everything. And I think that people's appetite to consume that bleeding edge technology is always there. Now, what will happen is the features that it's in your $800 phone today will come down over time. And so at the end of the day, someone buying a $400 or $500 phone will get those rich features that they saw a couple of years ago. But I personally believe innovation is going to keep that processing power, keep that hardware. How many cameras are in a phone today, right? I mean, the most popular phone in America today has 3 cameras on the back, but I can tell you, and 2 on the front. But a number of cameras that are in phones around the world and they're coming out, there's going to be more and more of those, which is going to keep the BOM cost higher and therefore the average selling price higher.
Right. Final question here really is about security. So obviously now we're connecting more and more devices, creating new vulnerabilities. We're all connecting from home multiple devices. How do both your companies think about securing those devices and their connections to the network and securing people's data? Is that something that sort of you guys are focused on, as well as the actual software providers? Give a little sort of context around that.
Sure. I mean, security is obviously very important, especially when it comes to privacy. And from a device level perspective, there's certainly a lot of things that we want to make sure the device is overall secure. And so we have a number of different applications or processes within our devices as well, whether we support things in Trust Zone, and we have dedicated hardware support like security keys and things like this within the device. But it's also very important to make sure that when you're connecting to a device, that link is also secure. So we do support a number of different protocols for security purposes, that when you have a connection between a cloud or another device, that those are secure end to end, right? So, and you have to stay ahead of this game, right? I mean, especially if you don't want, people hacking into devices, you hear about this a lot. So it's constantly evolving, right? So the key here is to protect both the device at the device level and also the protocols that go between devices and the cloud.
Great. Well, I appreciate you both for joining us today to talk about mobile